So our feature presenter is the CEO of PDCA Social, a digital marketing agency in Irvine, California. He helps businesses large and small who are trying to maximize their investment in digital and social to get that ROI return. He teaches social media marketing and digital at a number of leading educational institutions, including Rutgers University, the Irish Management Institute in Ireland, and even a university in Finland. So one thing you might not know about our presenter is that he's not only fluent in Japanese and Mandarin Chinese, but he's also an avid soccer fan. He coaches his son's elementary school team and even plays in a league himself. So today he's going to share tips on how you can use social media to really growth hack, whether it's promoting your programs or products or services. So without further ado, give a warm business accelerator welcome to Neal Schaffer.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Anyone have the pointer? Thank you, sir. Alrighty. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? You know, when you fly from Denver to Madison and the pilot says, we're about to land in Madison where the Badgers just ranked 10th nationally, you know you've come to a special place. So thank you for having me here. First time in Madison, but it's been awesome so far. Great people, great town. Hopefully I'll bring my family back here. Okay, so Introduction to Social Media Growth Hacking is the name of the topic. If you do a search for social media growth hacking, the term really doesn't exist. There is a popular term in marketing called growth hacking. And things that I have done for my own agency and working with clients, I have sort of leveraged that keyword and tacked social media on it to describe the tactics and things that I have done for my clients that I want to introduce to you today. And hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. So I was just introduced. I won't go through all this. I've been doing social media marketing since 2008, written a few books, consult, speak, the whole bit. What I've done recently and what's more relevant for this presentation, and that's in Japanese, obviously. I don't expect you'll be able to read Otetsudai Dekiru Gyoumu Nayo. But what I found is that companies need social media help in mainly 3 different ways. And this agency is mainly geared towards Japanese companies. So it's really relevant because I'm representing companies that have no or very little brand recognition here in the United States and helping them go from 0 or very small presence to something more major. So you have a lot of companies that that want to do everything in-house, and for those companies I help with training, speaking, strategic consulting. You have a lot of consumer brands that work with multiple agencies, so obviously my agency is one of those. And then you have startups, smaller companies, small businesses where they just want to throw everything over the fence and have you do everything. Japanese, it's called marunage. So there's a few different types of companies, and this really shows you how far social media has become an important part of marketing in modern day business. Most recently, I think most relevant to here in Madison is a new program. One of the programs I teach at is at Rutgers University. They have an executive education program called a mini social media MBA. Just last week, we launched the first social selling. In other words, how salespeople, B2B salespeople primarily, but also B2C, can leverage social media for their sales process as part of their sales toolkit. So I'm really honored to be part of that. I'm the lead faculty. And when I was looking for great people to have come on as instructors in the program, I found none other than Spencer Smith here from Madison, who is one of the 5 instructors as part of the program. So there's a little bit of Madison in this program. So thank you, Spencer. Thank you. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I should also point out that this is not a one-way conversation. Your ROI from seeing me speak is to get something out of this. So whenever you have a question at any time, I want you to raise your hand. For those of you online, I want you to put it in the Q&A box. We do have someone dedicated to asking me your questions here in the back. And I'm hoping that you will be asking questions because often the best content comes out in responding to your questions. So if you have a question at any time, please raise your hand and I'll get to you in between slides. So this is not a presentation about growth hacking. I don't consider myself a growth hacker per se, but it is a presentation about what I like to call a new mindset, a new set of tactics that I'll be going through shortly. Hopeful outcome is that if you take one of these 13 things I'm going to introduce to you, if you take 1 or 2 of these to heart and really implement it at your own business or for your own brand, that you'll get very, very positive ROI from my presentation. So I was recently in Japan where they're actually a little bit further behind on digital transformation. And not every business in the United States has actually gone through a complete digital transformation. So I like to start with, well, social is part of digital, right? If I was to talk about what are the things a business can do from a marketing perspective digitally, obviously you have a website. There's a lot of traffic that comes from Google, so you need to do search engine marketing or search engine optimization. You then obviously need content in order to do that. We have the term content marketing, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. You have email marketing, which definitely has not gone away and is as important as ever. And then you have social media marketing, both organic and paid, and then what I like to call digital relationship marketing, or leveraging the other, which is leveraging your employees, your fans, or influencers as part of your marketing objectives. And really the most interactive, the areas where you can go from zero to nothing tend to be in the social media space. You don't really need to have legacy marketing assets in order to leverage that. But I also want to point out that if you look at these other components, like search engine marketing and content marketing, if you think about it, every social network is its own search engine, right? If people are searching for things on Instagram, either you're there or you're not there. When people do a search on Twitter, either you're there or you're not there. In fact, Twitter is probably the largest real-time search engine in the world, and data suggests it might be the second largest search engine in terms of number of search queries, second to only Google. So, and I consider blogging part of, when you blog with a social voice, is part of social media, and then obviously you have these components as well. Social can be part of your website, social can be part of your email marketing, so it's a very, very important technology that really overlaps everything we do in digital marketing. Now, I believe we need to change the way the businesses have been doing social media marketing for quite some time. Back, I call this 2011 social media, when we just had Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. It was not easy to be a social media marketer, but it was a lot less complex, right? You have 3 major networks, and that's it. Well, we've seen an influx of new networks, and not only are there new networks, but they're mobile only, or definitely mobile first networks that you see here on, shaded here. Instagram, Snapchat, we have live stream, we have Facebook Messenger, we have things from China, WeChat, from Japan Line, things that Facebook is looking at and adopting their functionality into Facebook Messenger. So if you're not an active user of a mobile phone, you're never going to have a mobile first mentality, and therefore you lose out on the potential that social media has. And I find a lot of enterprises that are used to using desktop tools, you can't post to Instagram from a desktop tool. At some point you need to do it from someone's smartphone, right? So it requires a new mentality, obviously. And it kills me when I see companies with the Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter icon, yet right now Instagram is the second largest social network, and they're completely ignoring it. So that's sort of the reality. The other reality is that the Fortune 500, speaking of large companies, they really lag behind. I think the Google Plus is going to become irrelevant pretty soon. This comes from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. They do a survey. 2017 results are not out yet, but they basically do a survey of the Fortune 500, which company has a presence where. So obviously you got Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram only 45%. Pinterest might not be as applicable to B2B companies as it is to consumer-facing brands. But clearly, why isn't Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn 100%, right? So for a lot of companies, social media marketing has become like a factory. Produce X number of pieces of content per week, produce X number of tweets per week or per day, and it's become very mechanical. And I think for companies that have figured out how to do social media marketing from a technical perspective, and it's like, okay, we get it now, we'll just do this, and it's fine, they really miss out on the potential, and I think that they get left behind in the dust by their competition that follows some of these social media growth hacking tactics that I'm going to introduce to you. So I developed these, as I said, from my Japan-facing agency. Even in the logo, it's in half English, half Japanese. And it's really, there was no guidebook. And I think in social media, it's less about listening to one person or reading one book, but getting multiple perspectives on what is possible and creating your own rules, writing your own book of what is possible. But it's really through actual helping of companies from a variety of industries, B2B, B2C, and what have you, where I develop these concepts that I put together in this presentation. So growth hacking, per se, if you wanted to know more about the topic because you've heard the keyword, this is really the best resource that I would introduce to you. It's a book by Ryan Holiday, Growth Hacker Marketing. It's a really, really quick read. And it really talks about how did some of these companies go from zero to become huge companies in Silicon Valley. And I'm going to be borrowing some of those concepts that are applicable to social media in this presentation. So the first thing is, and this is a quote from the book, growth hacking is more of a mindset than a toolkit. You're not going to find, the holy grail social media growth hacking tool. It does not exist, right? But it is a mindset. And part of the mindset that comes from this is, and if you read Growth Hacker Marketing, a lot of the companies that are brought up in it are new companies. They do not have any legacy. They are digital native, people that work there grew up using the web, using social media. For millennials in the audience, you're nodding because that's natural. For Gen Xers and baby boomers, it's obviously not natural. So these are two companies that are often brought up as great examples of growth hacking or successful growth hackers, Dropbox, Airbnb, that really went from nothing to something in a little bit of time. Now, what's interesting, not only about removing yourself from your legacy or being able to start anew, which startups and companies that have recently been joined or that have younger staff can do very quickly. Older companies that have a lot of brand equity, a lot of legacy, it's a lot harder to shake that off and do what I'm about to talk about. But another thing about growth hacking is, and one of the products that's often brought up as an example is this one, is Hotmail. So Hotmail, before the advent of Gmail, a lot of us back in the day, a lot of you don't remember those days, but we used something called Hotmail from Microsoft. So some of the things about growth hacking that resonate with social media is that, number one, products are kickstarted, shared, and optimized. The product is never finished. Gmail was in beta for like a decade, if I'm not mistaken. So the idea is you get something out there in the market and you test it. The second thing is you're not only testing it, you're using the tools of the internet and social media to help you in the testing and in the iteration. I do social media advertising on behalf of clients because I want to figure out what resonates with people, right? So I can find a target audience and show them a few different visuals, and what's the visual that's going to resonate with them? What's the visual that they're going to like? What's the visual that they're going to click on? Or it could be 10 different products that I want to develop or resell. So you get the feeling how this concept resonates with social media, and you build a self-perpetuating marketing machine. So what Hotmail did is, at the very bottom of every email that was sent through Hotmail, they placed this in the signature, get your free email at Hotmail, and literally in 1.5 years, it has said that 1 of every 6 internet users became a Hotmail user through a very, very simple growth hack. So what I want you to do is to treat social media in this nature, to treat social media as your focus group. Early in my career, I grew up in Southern California, went to college in Massachusetts, then actually lived in Japan for 15 years. So Procter & Gamble has their Asia headquarters in Kobe, Japan, where I was living nearby. So I actually had an offer early in the day to become product marketing manager for this product, Bounce, which you put in dryers to freshen up the scent and what have you. And what I learned from that experience and meeting the P&G folks over a course of time was the main thing they did to try to understand the market was to do focus groups. So we have budget, we're going to call in our target audience, we're going to ask them how they use the product, what are products in the market, what have you. Social media is that focus group. Anybody can create their own focus group. You're all a focus group of of a certain demographic, right? And I can ask you questions, get answers for free, like you can on social media once you build a community and you tap into that community. So when you start to treat social media as a focus group, you see the power of being able to find out what works, what doesn't work for your target audience. So that's step one, is about the mindset. Step two is we can't all do what Hotmail did. But there are ways of building social media somehow into our product. Now, I like to give very, very simple examples. This is an auto dealer in Tustin, California. I leased an Acura MDX about a year ago from them. And as I was pulling out, the salesperson said, "Hey, Neal, can I take a picture of you?" So you're in a new car. You're going to be smiling, right? It's a great picture. So a few hours later, I get the picture in an email with links to post a review on Google, on Yelp, and what have you. A very, very simple thing. Not everybody's going to post a review. But hey, if you like the photo, you might post it online and say, hey, this is where I bought the car. Or maybe someone's going to ask about it. So all of this word of mouth that we talk about offline, how much of that can you generate online is the key thing here. Now, the concept of building social media or building the sort of word of mouth component into your product is not new by any means. This is back in my days of selling semiconductors in China for a company called Rome Semiconductor. That's me there with a cheesy smile. And we went to all these boring trade shows trying to convince engineers to buy our semiconductors. What really worked and why we were often the most popular booth at these trade shows was we had this technology that fax machines use called thermal print heads. And what we were doing was we discovered a way to actually create a photo booth and take people's pictures with the thermal print heads and put it in like a sticker sheet. And this is like 1994 or 5, very, very early to be able to do that. So everybody wanted to come to our booth to get their picture taken, right? And therefore, we got name cards, we were able to engage the audience, and these trade shows were really, really successful for us. We built this sort of word of mouth, this buzz component into what we were doing. And events are a great way to do this, as you can imagine. Sometimes you build it into your product in this way. This is a Japanese restaurant in Newport Beach, California called Kitayama. They're the only Japanese restaurant that I know of in a county of 3 million people of Orange County that actually have a traditional Japanese garden. So you can imagine how many people, it's really cool at night as you can see in the photo, you can imagine how many people come here and take photos and post them online of this garden, which indirectly is promoting this restaurant. So I always ask people, do you have something Instagrammable about your company? And for B2B companies, obviously it's a lot harder than for consumer-facing brands where you walk into a space. But I've been hired by hotels. It's like, well, when people are in your hotel, what are they going to take a picture of that's going to help spread the word about your hotel? What's cool about your hotel? This is an awesome space right here, Dream Bank, a 19th century building that is Instagrammable in itself, right? And last night I had dinner at the good old Heritage Tavern. Sometimes it's just the presentation, right? A $6, cheese charcuterie plate, to me looked amazing on this rough, cut wood. Everything was laid out separately, very, very artistic. French food obviously has an advantage here, but these are little things you can do. And like I said, for consumer-facing brands, it's a lot easier to try to work somehow this word-of-mouth component, this Instagrammable type of component into your product. So those are 2 of the first 13 steps. Do we have any questions so far? Any questions online or offline? All this makes sense?
Got one from Lori.
Lori.
She asked, should
Hi,
you, because small businesses can only do so much, should you pick 1 or 2 of the social media channels and do them well? What are the top ones, if so?
So the question was, if small businesses can only do so much, if you could pick 1 or 2 channels, what would you do? As you can imagine, that's a very, very difficult question. It's, are you a consumer-facing brand? Are you a B2B brand? Are you a e-retailer? You definitely do not have to, and I don't want you to do everything I talk about today, because if you're a small business, you just can't, right? But you obviously need to find the strategic points. That gets into almost like a social media consulting exercise of what are the key networks. I'd say part of it comes down to what are the networks that you feel comfortable on. If you understand that Pinterest might be important, but you're an Instagram person and you've built your own community there, maybe Instagram is going to be the way, right? But it really starts with your audience. What are the networks that they use? Can you do Google search online and find case studies of similar companies that have been successful on those networks? I think today, obviously for B2B, we tend to talk about LinkedIn more. For consumer-facing brands, Facebook is still king. If you have a photographical product, that's geared towards a younger demographic, we would tend to talk about Instagram. For e-commerce, for a female demographic, we tend to talk about Pinterest. Twitter can really be used on both sides, I believe, B2C and B2B. But Twitter is also sort of global. When you tweet, you're on a global stage. So if you're a local-faced company, Yelp might be the one key social network for you, right? There's a lot of different answers, as you can imagine. Hopefully that gave you some ideas. And as I keep talking, if you have follow-up questions, please do post them online. Alrighty. So, step number 3, focus on one product or service line. This is an image from a visual social audit that I did for a client that is competing with Nordstrom, Sephora, Target. And this is a snapshot of what Nordstrom was posting on Instagram back when I did the audit. Now, if you go into a Nordstrom, is there a Nordstrom here in Madison? No? Okay. Sort of a high-end department store that sells a lot of different things. Men's fashion, women's fashion, furniture, home appliances, what have you. But if you look at their Instagram feed, they're not pushing everything, right? They're only pushing things that are sellable to a female demographic that is interested in fashion. Because probably somewhere in time, they realize that is either the target demographic on Instagram and it's a really good follow-up to that question we just had, through experimenting with different types of images, these are the ones that really resonated with people. So you don't need to do everything. A lot of companies make mistakes because they're like, oh, we have all these products, we got to push them all. You need to join the community and find what resonates with the community. I think Nordstrom has done a really, really good job here. And this gets to a growth hacking concept called product market fit, okay? And this comes from growth hacker marketing. Growth hackers believe that products, even whole businesses and business models, can and should be changed until they are primed to generate explosive reactions from the first people who see them. Okay, what does this mean? If you're advertising a product and you're getting a very, very low click-through rate when you advertise it, do you have the right product or are you targeting the right audience, right? You should be getting a very, very high click-through. If that is a product that target audience needs and should be excited for. And if not, you may want to rethink about what you're trying to sell. So this is, I'm assuming this is something that Nordstrom did to find the product market fit for their products to blend into the Instagram community. And for every social network, this is going to be different. Obviously, there are two different ways of testing your product market fit. You can do it organically through a simple post, or you have the ability to do it through a paid post. And through the paid post, obviously, we have the ability to use different images, different text to try to find that unique combination that really, it really gives us the best product market fit for that audience. So we talked about the mindset. We talked about building some sort of word of mouth component, social media component into your product. We talked about the product market fit. So that's sort of the infrastructure. Let's get a little bit more tactical and deeper into the actual implementation of these tactics. So step number 4, it's something I've done with all my clients. And I have clients that have 5 different social icons on their homepage, and they're bad at all of them. They haven't posted on Google Plus in 3 months. They haven't tweeted in a month. They post on Facebook once a week. And I say, hey, we're going to unplug. We're just going to do 2 channels, and we're going to do them right. And we're going to A/B test, and we're going to find out what works and what doesn't work. A lot of people have concepts in their head. Well, we need to be on Facebook. And as I was saying with that example, that Twitter can bridge both, I did an experiment, right? Marketing's all about experiments, and social media especially. Let's do A/B. We have a marketing budget. We have an advertising budget. We're going to do Facebook, but also to compare and contrast, we're going to do Twitter. And Twitter did better than Facebook. We had a 30% cheaper conversion on Twitter, even a higher quality of conversion on Twitter than we did with Facebook, which we would have only found if we had experimented. So you all need to experiment. You have Pinterest, you have Instagram, you have all these different social networks. Just start with 2. And once you build your winner, then you compare and contrast others to it, is really my advice. So I was asked the question, what's the most important channel? If you could just pick 1 or 2 channels. Obviously, if you're B2B, it's going to be a little bit different than B2C. This data is a little bit outdated because Instagram has probably gone up. But Facebook is still the Godzilla where everybody is, even though not everyone is there all the time. And LinkedIn for B2B is as strong as ever. So these are the 2 no-brainers. But as far as A/B testing, another thing that I want you to think about is these 2 different types of social networks that exist. And this becomes very, very important for social media growth hacking. So we have the concept of A/B testing, right? We actually have, if you think about it, 2 different types of social networks. On the left-hand side, you basically have, from a business perspective, pay-to-play platforms. You cannot friend people from your Facebook page. You cannot connect with people from a LinkedIn company page. In fact, in order to do the things that do best from an algorithm perspective in the newsfeed, you have to be a person on these networks, or you have to have a really nice advertising budget in order to get visibility. On the other hand, you have these social networks on the right. And YouTube is one of them, but especially something like Twitter or Instagram or Pinterest. Whether you're a person or you're a business, you pretty much have the same functionality. A business on Instagram can friend others. They can like other people's posts. They can send social signals, which is going to be another of these 13 steps I'm going to talk about later. You have the ability to engage that you can't do on these other networks. So inevitably, when you do an A/B test, and to further respond to that question of what are the 2 networks, you're probably going to have one of these networks because it's where the mass of people are, but you also want to be doing A/B testing in one of these networks because there's a lot more you can do organically. And I guarantee you, if you had a 0 advertising budget and you had a Facebook page with 100 fans and Twitter following with 100 followers, and you tweeted once a day and posted once a day on Facebook, organically, your Twitter is going to grow faster. I would put 100 to put a $1,000 bet on that, right? And that's because there's more things you can do organically, and you're seen, right? Now, the reason I put the good old Snapchat icon down below is that these networks you're seen on, when you do a search, you can find anybody. Snapchat is still not as searchable as these networks are, which is why and Snapchat is opening up as we speak, but which is why it's been hard for companies to really get a lot of visibility on Snapchat without having a large following or using all the other channels to push people to follow them on Snapchat. So Snapchat's at a little bit of a disadvantage. So step number 5, build this targeted community for testing. So growth hacking is all about testing product market fit. What is going to make the most sense? And even if you're an established company, right, you're not trying to develop new products and services. Which of your products, what components of your products are going to have the best fit for social media? So another quote from the Growth Hacker Marketing book. Growth hackers deliberately attract only the early adopters who make or break new tech services. There are a lot of companies that have been able to tap in to early adopters who these days, maybe back 10, 15 years ago, they were tech bloggers, but these days, early adopters are these very, very active social media users, right? That are really good at talking about brands and spreading the word about brands. So it makes sense that if you want to attract the early adopters, there's a very, very easy way to do that. It's online, and the best growth hack, and if we define a growth hack as how you reach your first group of users, which is the definition in the book, is paid social, is spending a little bit of money to attract those people that should be interested in your product, and you can try to see who these early adopters might be with all the different targeting options, and seeing if you can get them into your community, where then you can build that community and test things in that community. All right, step number 6. Any questions online, Chris? Doing good? Any questions offline? You've been a very, very good audience this morning. So step number 6, create shareable website content of value. In social media, you have to have content. People do not have to have content. They have unique experiences, right? They can say, hey, what's up? Brands can't do that. And some brands try to do it, and they look pretty silly doing that unless they've cultivated that sort of audience. So you need to have content, and ideally this content is going to be seeded on these different social networks, but at the end of the day, it's going to bring people back to your website where you convert them. And I'll talk more about that important shortly. So the role of content, obviously, I showed how social overlaps all these different functionalities of digital marketing. You need content on your website for search engines, which are still huge. I've been blogging for 7 years. I am very active in social media. I have huge social media communities. I'm considered a social media influencer. An overwhelming majority of my traffic comes from Google. And I think if you ask a lot of influential bloggers as well, they will give you the same answer. You cannot ignore Google search, right? And in social media growth hacking, content is the greatest experimental element that you have in your arsenal to try to figure what makes people tick, what makes people attracted to your audience. Now, the sad thing, I recently attended earlier this year Adobe Summit where Joe Pulizzi, the godfather of content marketing, was talking, and you're going to see 2 of my tweets about his presentation. 90% of content created in mid to large companies are about the company. Only 10% is audience-centric. Today's presentation is audience-centric content. American Family Insurance, you wouldn't even know that they're the sponsor behind this event today. They're not pushing their content. They're not being salesy. They are using audience-centric content. Now, in terms of what is audience-centric content, it's not about what you want to promote. It's about what might interest social media users. And I like to think in very, very simplistic terms. I have a friend who wears a lot of different hats. Maybe you have a few different products and services. Every single product or service that you have is going to have a different target audience, and therefore is going to require different types of content that is going to be relevant to that target audience. It's not a hard equation to make, but often companies, when they create their content, they really forget about their audience, right? They're only thinking about their product. They're only thinking about themselves. And this is a very, very dangerous thing to do. And you end up producing a lot of content that just has no resonance in social media or on search engines for that matter. So the other thing that content helps us do, and what companies are really trying to do in terms of social media, is use paid social and organic, well, not organic, but Google ads. It's really all about retargeting. Because in order to close a deal, you need 5 to 10 touches, maybe 10 to 15 touches. And every time you see the image of that company on your screen, whether it's inside social media or out social media, it's adding a touch. So what companies are trying to do is they're trying to use social to get you to visit their website so that they can retarget you, to take part in a campaign where they can retarget you, to somehow engage with their content like a live stream or a video so that they can retarget you. This has become one of the key roles that content has. And it becomes really important when we talk about things like employee advocacy later on, is having your employees try to bring people back to your website where you have the ability to retarget them. But getting back to the concept of content, I like this concept of content buckets. So you might be trying a lot of different types of content. And Nordstrom probably did this with female fashion, shoes, whatever categories they had, dresses, jewelry, makeup, and really to test each one of these types of contents and see how they do on any given social network. And I guarantee over time you're going to find that some types of content, these could be blog categories, perform better than others, and you want to tweak that. One company that I work with was focused on helping people reduce their risk of getting Alzheimer's disease later in life. So one of the categories of content was about the latest research in Alzheimer's. Another one was about caregivers, because our target audience often were caregivers and caregivers' advice. Another one was just about general health, right? Another one was about exercise. Another was about food. And believe it or not, we found that on different social networks, different content performed differently. And we were able to engage differently and really maximize the potential that all these communities had for our brand. So this is a very, very simple, easy concept that I think you can all implement for your own business. And I guarantee you the buckets and the ratio of how you use these buckets for Facebook is going to be different for Instagram. It's going to be different for Twitter. And that's really now you're becoming part of that community and resonating with that unique community. So step number 7, create a lead magnet of value. And lead magnets come in very different ways. An event could be a lead magnet. When you register for an event, you often give an email address, which then enables others to join your list and enter a funnel. Once again, from Joe Polizzi's presentation at the Adobe Summit, Copyblogger, who's pretty famous in the blogging world, 98% of his revenue comes from email subscribers, right? So at the end of the day, and if we remember that digital marketing slide I showed you at the very beginning, you sort of have to be everywhere. You don't have to be everywhere in social. You need to be somewhere in social, but you need to have a website. You need to be doing some sort of search engine marketing, whether it's SEO, producing a lot of content, what have you. And you need to be doing email because we're not everywhere at once. Social media often is a fleeting place. We're focusing on our friends. We may not be seeing a lot of brand content unless it's advertising. But guarantee that somewhere during the day we're checking our emails, right? And that's why email has not gone away. And this is where social media growth hacking is going to help you build your list. And in fact, you find big companies. I was looking for a new office desk. I just moved locally in Orange County. I was looking for a new office desk, and almost every site I went to, 3 or 4 seconds after I went to the site, I was getting a splash, right? Office Depot has over 1 million Facebook fans, but they may want to get 1 million email addresses, right? And it's very, very hard to do in social because that's not what social is made for. It's a lot easier once you get people to your website and they have some sort of affinity, and then you get them into your email marketing or marketing automation machine. But the other important aspect of this is to own your territory. That you don't really control the IP of what is out there in social, right? But you control the branding, you control everything about your website. And at the end of the day, if they need to buy from you or reach out to you, it happens more than likely on your website where you're in control of the message. So at the end of the day, you need to own your territory. Those of you may not remember, but back in the day, Facebook had apps. They now use a technology called iframe. They used to have something called FBML, or Facebook Markup Language. So you had to figure out this markup language in order to develop an app on Facebook. And then all of a sudden, Facebook said, we're going to stop supporting that. You can use iframe. And all the money spent on all these Facebook markup language apps all went to waste. A good example of why you need to own your territory. So content is part of an important part of social media growth hacking. The other part is engagement. And if you think about it, first of all, actively engaging in social media is going to require content, right? It's often going to require curated content, which I'm going to talk about, in order to be able to do so. You need to be talking on a regular basis in order to engage with the community. And if we break social media down into its core elements, it's really a convergence of information and communication. You're either having a conversation with someone or you're sharing some sort of information, whether it's a photo, a link somewhere, a video, what have you. So for businesses, content is the currency of social media. Everything you do in social is going to come down to that content. Content also, social, just because you're big on social media doesn't mean that you're generating a lot of business. But what content helps you do, I do believe that people still buy from people and from companies they know, like, and trust. I don't think that's changed even in the digital age. But content allows you to be found, more so on certain social networks. It allows you to build trust from a consistent presence there, and it allows you to build community by, every time there's a like, there's a greater affinity with your brand, you are slowly building a community. But you need, in social media, content in order to do this. Not everybody has time to create content to be able to post on a regular basis. That's where the concept of content curation comes in. So there's lots of tools. This is a tool called BuzzSumo. There's other tools. You can even do Google searches. It's really, really easy to find content. Even for very, very niche B2B industries that I work for, there is so much content. We are in a glut of content that's been created over the past 5 years. There's no lack of content you can find that you can post. You're not going to post your competitors' content, but by posting this content, you're using this content to engage your community. And at the end of the day, build a community and interest people in your product and service. So anything that your potential target customer might be interested in, You find content that builds up need for your product, that case studies, professional associations, whatever it might be, and you share that content as a way of engaging. We have a question.
Hey, Neal, could you go back to that? Could you explain how something like, I believe you said BuzzSumo was used?
So, the question was,
Oh, great.
you can keep holding the mic if you
Okay,
want.
so could you explain how a tool like BuzzSumo can be used to do a curation strategy?
Okay, so I assume the online people heard that with the mic? Okay, so first of all, it comes down to the strategy. Part of the strategy is going to be the content. What are keywords, what are topics that best not only describe your products and services, but also might be interesting to those people. So I gave you the example of the Alzheimer's disease. Fitness, health, exercise. Take any keyword and you put it in a tool like this. Now what BuzzSumo does is you have actually a time frame. It looks at the time the content was published. You don't see it here, but it's on the left-hand side. Okay. And what this means is you don't want to be posting old content unless it's really, really evergreen. So you want to try to find new content, something that's been published over the last week, so that when it goes out, it's actually news, and people will have a less chance that they've actually seen it. We type in a keyword, and basically what it's doing is it's looking at all the content on the internet that's been published over that last time frame. It could be 24 hours, 7 days, what have you. And now it's showing you the amount of social shares it has had by social network. So, two different theories here. You could find something that's been really, really popular on Facebook and say, well, it's already been vetted by people. I know if I share this on Facebook, I'm going to have a higher chance that it's going to be popular on Facebook. Or, well, everyone's already seen it on Facebook. I'm going to try to find something that no one has seen. I'm going to try to find something with fewer shares. But what you're doing is you're basically going through all the content. Not all the content's going to be relevant, right? Because this is some computer processing the keywords. You're going to get a lot of irrelevant research. So at the end of the day, there's a human, believe it or not, that's responsible of doing the actual curating, of actually reading the content and making sure that it represents your brand, and then it's going to resonate with the audience. So that's how you use the tool for discovery. Now you can also post through the tool, you can post through any tool that you have, but it's a great way of just discovering content that you may not have known about. During the whole Alzheimer's, a lot of the viral content related to Alzheimer's was these Alzheimer's walks that the Alzheimer's Society is doing. But then, I don't know if any of you know, but in the society, in the community, it was huge. This karaoke, a dad with Alzheimer's was in England, was in his car shooting a video with his son, and his son shot the video because he has Alzheimer's, but he remembers how to sing this one song from the 50s. And so he did a karaoke with his son, and this went absolutely viral in England. And I discovered it because I was using this tool on a daily basis trying to find the latest news. So not only do you become a curator, but you also become a consumer because you realize this is a great way to keep up with the news in your own community, in your own industry and what have you. So you get better, tapped in. Then you start to think, why are some of these doing better on one network than another? And you uncover more realities, and more advice. So it all starts with using a tool and getting into that, whether it's daily or weekly, that exercise.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Just real quick.
Sure.
Do you have an opinion or an idea about the split between your own content and curated content?
It's a great lead into my next slide. Perfect. I knew you were going to ask that.
There you go.
So there's a lot of these rules out there, the 80-20 rule, the 4-1-1 rule. I thought that all the rules out there were still too self-promotional. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to build community and build trust before you send out anything that's self-promotional. Or you want to leave your self-promotional content for an advertisement where people see that it's sponsored content. So in this context, I created my own 911 rule. Thought it made sense and it was easy to remember. So you want to focus on the content of others, right? In building up content for this company related to Alzheimer's, there was a lot of content being created. There were a lot of content being created by what we would consider influencers in the community. So if I'm going to curate content, why wouldn't I want to curate content from influential organizations, influential people, and then tag them when I share that content? It is an absolute no-brainer. It's a win-win. It actually gets into a little bit of influencer marketing, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. You also have advocates. You have people that are talking about your brand. If you look at a brand like Taco Bell, a lot of the stuff they post is retweets of what their fans have said about Taco Bell. And in fact, I get to my next slide, there are brands, very, very reputable brands like Ritz-Carlton Hotels or Disneyland that just curate 100% of their content on Instagram. Why compete when there's so many great photos out there? Let's just leverage the voice of fan. So when thinking about finding content to post, the traditional old school marketing is we have to create all this content. Well, the new school marketing is, and I believe the future of social media content isn't even about your own content. It's leveraging the voice of the social media user, all about user-generated content. But getting back to this slide, you have influencers, you have advocates, you might have customers, you might have partners, you might have fans. There's a lot of different communities that you can pull content from, and it just looks a lot more authentic. It resonates better because it's made by other people, and we tend to resonate better with people than we do with businesses. So every once in a while, you're going to have your own content that adds value. This might be an event you're doing, a webinar, a coupon. It might be an ebook. It might be blog content. And then you might have your promotional content. So if you were tweeting 3 times a day, maybe once in 4 days, you would post something a little bit more blatantly self-promotional. I think I would say really don't post anything really self-promotional unless you really feel the need to. Unless you have a deadline, you have a certain KPI you need to hit, and you just need to up that up. But the longer you can stay without posting your own self-promotional content, the better it's going to be for your brand and social in the long run. And definitely leverage user-generated content. In fact, we began talking about content curation. Let me get to your question. User-generated content now has really taken over the spotlight, especially on Instagram, but obviously it's not limited just to Instagram. And I can't emphasize the importance of doing this and making sure when you do it, of tagging that user and beginning a conversation with that user, which can have tremendous benefits for your social media program. Question?
Yeah, so you were talking about 9 times content, like for people that are advocates, fans, influencers, fans, whatever. What's your take on it's coming from you as a business owner? You want to tell your story, people that know you, trust you, like you, are going to buy from you. So can you use Instagram, for example, to tell a story from your own personal perspective? That's not promoting your brand, but kind of getting people to know you.
Great question. So can you use, in terms of the 911, what about if you're trying to build a story? Can you use Instagram to help you build the story? Yes, every social network is sort of different in how often you reshare content. I think on Instagram you see a lot few reposts than you would see repins on Pinterest, for example. And at the end of the day, you have to have your own story, right? So that would, what I would be called, your content adds value in any way. When it's telling your story and people resonate and you give them inspiration, or they learn something from it, or it attracts them to your brand, but not in a promotional way. That's what I would determine that to be. At the end of the day, this is only a guideline, and I created the guideline because I find companies to be too self-promotional. If you are never self-promotional on Instagram, I would keep doing what you're doing, right? I wouldn't tweak that model at all. But most companies start out the opposite way, where they didn't. And I think Instagram is a great example of how a lot of successful businesses and Instagrammers have become that way just by telling the story, just by being natural, right? And companies start out on the other side with the traditional marketing mind, and they can't do that. So just keep doing what you're doing. Question in the back.
Do you walk the fine line between showing your qualifications as an individual versus self-promotion, especially if you are in an area like you gave the examples, health or something very critical?
So is this a personal branding question, or is it from a business perspective?
Business.
Business. So the interesting thing about social media is if you talk a lot about a subject, over time, people find you and they start listening to what you post about that subject, and you begin to build influence. It could be by using images in Instagram with a hashtag. It could be tweets, what have you. But getting back to the question for the online audience is, what's the fine line to walk between showing your qualifications and being self-promotional, correct?
No, showing your qualifications to impart health advice.
Got it. So showing your qualifications is really, if you are qualified, you would be talking about certain content. So when you are curating content that makes sense, it shows in an indirect way that you are on top of the latest trends, right? Without even saying that you're qualified, people assume you are. Okay, I've never written a book on content marketing, but there's all these surveys that come out, who are the most influential people in such and such. So in content marketing, I came up like number 2 in this report like a week ago. I've never written a book on content marketing. It's probably like 10 books on it. But I talk a lot about content marketing because it's important for social. And therefore, people make an assumption that I'm very qualified because I talk a lot about it. And I think if you think about it, that's what it comes down to, right? Therefore, you are what you tweet. So if you always talk about something Alzheimer's related, people will assume that you are, or your product or service is well qualified for that market. Now, at the end of the day, you still have to convert them. Just because they're a member of your community doesn't mean they're going to buy from you. So that's when they get to your website, hopefully everything on your website backs up those qualifications that are assumed in social media, for lack of a better answer.
Hey, Neal, quick question
Yes.
in regards to this topic. Sarah asked, are there any guidelines for giving credit while using the content of others? It seems like it could be a fine line between sharing and stealing.
Okay, so my answer to that is, as long as you are saying that it's other people's content, it's not stealing. You're helping promote those people. You're actually amplifying their message. And it's always a best practice, and it's to your advantage to share the fact that that content comes from someone else. So I don't think it's stealing at all. I think in the early days of Pinterest, there were a lot of people saying, if you pin someone else's image, it's a copyright violation, what have you. You're creating a bookmark, to someone else's website. Now, if you put that image on your own website and use it as your own, and you don't tell people it's your own, then you are stealing. But I've written a few books, and I learned very on in the legal system, you can't copyright an idea, right? Ideas are free. Countries emulate other countries. Companies emulate other companies. So at the end of the day, you're never stealing unless you say it is your own, in which case you're a violation of copyright law. Any other questions? Okay. So we're about 2/3 done with the presentation. Hopefully we're okay on time here. I know we need to end at noon. Okay. At 1 o'clock, excuse me. So accelerate with paid social. So we talk about social media being this great way of amplifying the good and the bad about companies. Paid social is that accelerator, right? If there's a certain objective you have, if you want to build a larger community faster, if you want to get more clicks faster, paid social obviously is the way to go. And it comes down to supply and demand. I think the days of just having 100% organic success in social really are over. It still does happen. It's easier for people, for individual people to do this rather than brands. But at the end of the day, there's only so much, web screen when we're on any given social network, and more people and more content. There's only so much content we can see, and obviously this is how the social networks monetize. But it's not just the fact that you can advertise. It's things you can do that you really can't do in traditional internet advertising, in traditional platforms like Google. It's being able to create lookalike audiences of social networks going in and saying, hey, we understand your community. These are people that are most likely to join your community that you can market to. It's also, email addresses. If you have an email address database, of being able to make sure they join your community. It's also the concept of retargeting, not to mention all the other amazing things you can do in terms of targeting on any given platform, especially on a platform like Facebook. So there's no easier way to not only find your test market, find your community, but be able to accelerate your efforts by making sure that your message is only being seen by the people you want it to be seen by. And I already talked about this newest social media strategy of really retargeting as the basis and using social media as part of that retargeting, using paid social for that. So moving on to step 10, send social signals, right? You're in a room of a few 100 million people when you join a social network. If you're just waiting for the action to happen, it doesn't happen. Now on a Facebook or LinkedIn, you're used to paying money for ads. In those other social networks I talked about, there's a lot of different things you can do. Right? A lot of different ways of tapping people on the shoulder. Because if there's one place you want to show up as a business, it's in the notification bubble on any given social network. It's like the daily newspaper of 30 years ago. The first place where people go to when they wake up often is look at their notifications in social networks. And the way you get there is by sending these social signals. When you follow someone, when you favorite, you retweet, you repost, you mention, send a direct message, add to a list. Now, I'm not saying that you want to do all of this and you want to do it in a tacky way. You need to be savvy at how you do this. Because it can be spammy. But there's a lot of things you can do that brands just don't take advantage of in social media that you should. And this is another way of how you really start to gain a lot of traction. You can really build a community. Go follow those that you would want to join your community, right? And if they're not following you back, they're either not impressed with you, maybe you haven't built up a good enough rapport with them, maybe you should be sharing more content that resonates with them, what have you. By following this concept, and growing your community, it really helps you become a better part of that community, and it helps you get more organically. You don't need to pay for advertising on every social network. We've seen a lot of Instagram success stories of people just doing this organically, commenting, liking, and increasing their community. Question?
This is where we really see the labor intensity of your social media campaigns. Is that correct?
Correct.
This is where you're paid with your time.
And engagement yields more engagement. So this is the time-consuming part. This is what the tools, artificially, there might be some tools in some networks that might help you do some of this, but at the end of the day, it comes down to a human doing this. I mean, it's virtually you're tapping someone on the shoulder. So yeah, it does take time, and it's sort of mapping out a certain amount of time. But then you get to the time is money, and am I better spending an hour of my time every day doing this, or converting that into money and using paid social for that, right? And that's why paid social accelerates all this for you. But in organic networks, if you have a lot of time, you don't have a big advertising budget, you are able to do this.
Now, just with a follow-up to that, doesn't Facebook change the way they approach things and make it more necessary to do paid social?
Oh, absolutely. So
than it used to be. It's harder to do organic on Facebook than it used to be.
yeah, so getting back to that early slide of those two different types of social networks, if you're a business, Facebook is pretty much pay to play. I mean, there's only so much engagement you can do. You can only do those that engage with you on your page, on those posts. So that's the problem. But on these other social networks, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Pinterest, you do have the ability to do all this. And that's why you should take advantage of it on those communities. So step 11, leverage the other. Leverage the other is this digital relationship management concept that I talked about earlier. And it's all about leveraging other people. When you're a brand out there, you're sort of like this lonely fisherman on the boat. But there's a lot of boats out there. There's a lot of fishermen out there. There's hundreds of millions of people that might be able to help your company in different ways. Employees, fans, and influencers. And the reason why all of these, employee advocacy, brand advocacy, and influencer marketing, the reason why they work is because we're people. And guess who we trust more than anyone else? We trust recommendations from other people, right? So we're really trying to tap into this when we leverage the other. I won't talk a lot about employee advocacy. It's obviously the bigger the company, the more importance it has. But in marketing, we traditionally talk about paid media, owned media, earned media. There are some companies that feel that employed media or content that's either created and or shared by your employees is another type of media, another important type of media. So let's look about influencer marketing, though, which has become a huge market of its own. Just on Instagram alone, we've seen an incredible amount of money being spent on engaging with influencers. Two different mindsets when we talk about influencer marketing. You buy influence, you build influence. So you have your paid approach and you have your organic approach. Buying influence, you're paying money for an endorsement. It's just like paying money for an endorsement in the old days, on a TV ad or what have you. It's probably going to be expensive. It's probably an influence that fans know, so you're going to get your brand in front of relevant people, but it's a one-time, short-term thing. And probably this person is doing it for 30 different brands on 30 different days, and her fans or his fans know that they've probably been paid for the privilege. What I like to emphasize, and what I do with my own clients and want to recommend to you, is building influence organically. And you do this through curating their content, through sending these social signals, through building a genuine relationship and trying to create an influencer, create really a brand advocate out of an influencer. It's not going to happen for every influencer you engage with, but out of 100 influencers, if you can convert 5 of them into becoming brand advocates, they're not just going to talk about your company because you're paying them to, they're going to talk about your company naturally because you've already built a relationship with them and they become part of your brand. So engage organically, leverage your fans. I'm also a big fan of creating influencers out of brand advocates, doing it the other way around by promoting their content to your community. And really think in terms of a long-term relationship. These are people, you're sort of building a VIP, an MVP panel in social media of people that if you have a crisis, they can come to your rescue. If you have a new campaign or you need to get a few more emails signed, whatever it might be, these are people that can help you rally the troops and help you achieve a lot of different objectives. And it's coming from a person, not directly from you. So it resonates and it's very, very effective. Different ways of leveraging the other. Content curation is the easiest way to do it, and it should be an integral part of what you do in social media. You can then do content co-creation, reach out to them. We're doing a blog post. There's a lot of these roundup blog posts out there. Some have more value than others, but you can co-create content with them. User-generated content creation. A lot of hotels in Las Vegas will work with influencers because they want them to take really cool photos of the hotel. Photos that they just do not have the creative mindset to take that might do really well on social, and reuse that content for their own marketing purposes. Content amplification, we're having an event, we help amplify the content. Even account takeover, we've seen this a lot on Snapchat where a lot of the older generation just hasn't figured it out, so let's bring in a Snapchat influencer to take over our account for a day or for a week and build up our community. So at some point, though, you have to be accountable. And for a lot of small businesses who still question the ROI of social, this is sort of the math that I have them do, and I'll have each of you do. How much do you spend for a lead? And I think that when you look at the companies the new customers that you get, or people that walk through your door, at the end of the way, you have some sort of marketing and advertising budget, and you have some sort of sense as to how many new customers or new clients you're getting or new revenue, and you can see how much you spend for a lead. A lot of companies, it's funny, they try to treat social differently than traditional. So they go, well, how do you calculate the ROI out of this? And I say, well, how do you calculate the ROI out of all of your print ads, right? Because you can't unless you have some sort of special phone number or special coupon. So it's really the same thing. So every company, regardless of social media, you should know on average how much it costs to acquire a lead or a new customer. So how many leads do you need for a conversion? You have 10 people walk through your door. Maybe only one person buys, right? That is a 10% conversion rate. So in other words, if it costs you $100 for a lead and you need 10 leads for a conversion, it's costing you $1,000 per conversion. I hope that your profit on every product you sell is worth more than $1,000, otherwise you're not even breaking even. So then you're creating this lead magnet. You're creating something that's going to bring people to the door, that's going to add them to your marketing automation. It's going to require a follow-up phone call to them to ask them what they might be interested in. So create something of value. Create a landing page, or Eventbrite in terms of this event or something, ask for their email address. And then experiment with $1,000 of paid social, right? $1,000 of promoting whatever this lead magnet is, something of value to all these communities, bringing them into your marketing automation or your email, or getting contact information, or getting them into your store where then you can follow up with them and see how you do. And if you get more than one conversion, you've now proven that social has been more valuable than other forms of marketing. And this is really the concept. You want to see, well, how do we get our cost per conversion lower? How do we get our conversion rate higher? You start with these baseline metrics, and you really work your way up from there. And then you find different social communities give you different conversion rates. And what happens over time is that you always need to constantly optimize this. So we had the comment that Facebook is always making it harder for your content to be seen. Every social network is the same. They need advertising revenue to stay in business. So, the general truth about all this, and those that have been early on in social, you understand this, who uses social and how we use it, and the functionality being provided by all these different social networks is always in flux. And therefore, you always need to be optimizing. You always need to treat social media as a grand experiment. And therefore, the name of my agency is PDCA Social, because I'm a big fan of Professor Edwards Deming, who's considered the godfather of quality control. This Deming circle, when you do an experiment, you plan it, you do it, you check, and you act upon your results in order to be successful at it. And social media is really no different. Plan starts with the strategy, and with the metrics, with the KPIs you create, you measure, and you're always optimizing. But obviously, you need to begin with the end in mind. Right? You're not just doing social for social's sake. You have a specific KPI that you want to target. It might not be sales. It might be, goodwill in the community. There's a lot of different things that you can create KPIs for, but you need to begin with the end in mind. So I'll end with a case study of one of my clients who had zero brand recognition. They had no employees here in the United States. This is the Alzheimer's-related company. They did have one thing. They had a quiz. If you go to their website, you had to spend maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20 questions to go through this quiz of, how much risk might you have at getting Alzheimer's later in life based on scientific data that's publicly known. So they took this, they created this great content. A lot of people were interested in it. People had to give their age, their weight, their height in order to get an accurate answer. And the social engagement, every day I'm not going to say, hey, take our test, right? It was all this curated content. 99% of the content published in social was curated content, was everybody else's content. They created no blog content, right? Although we did create some visual content with inspirational quotes, what have you. Email marketing with segmentation, paid social, less than $2 cost per conversion of people actually finishing the test, submitting their personal details. In the course of 90 days, a 10,000 person hyper-targeted database that then we began to sell products and services to, and the Dr. Oz show actually reached out to us. And this is in 90 days, starting with zero. One example of one company in one industry purely leveraging user-generated content. This is something that I think every one of you can do for your own business. So, 13 different concepts. Hopefully one or two of these resonated with you. Social media is a complex space. As an educator, I try to teach you what I've learned. and hope that I don't expect you to be able to do all these, and I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully some of these concepts have resonated with you, and it helps you better maximize your own social. So I'm glad no one asked me about the future of social media, because I believe the future is now. There is so much you can do with all this information. Now, I'm based out here in Southern California. I'm actually in the process. Whenever I speak, the number one question I get asked these days is not about social media strategy. It's how do I become an Instagrammer? How do I build more influence for my personal brand, for a business brand? So I'm actually in the process of starting a mastermind. If any of you are interested, please send me an email.